Prince Andrew would fly off the handle if we've not opened the gate for him in time, or if we've stopped one of his guests because we've not got the right ID or we haven't been given any information of who they are. It would be verbally abusive. Shout, swear, yeah, just really rude individual.
And this, I think, is what is totally frustrating members of the royal family. He has always had a sense of entitlement. He's always been convinced by his royalness.
Picture this clearly. A man in his 40s shouting at housekeepers. Not because something priceless was broken, not because someone showed up late, but because a stuffed toy was placed in the wrong spot on a bed.
A young lady turned up, probably about 22, 23 years old, said she was here to see Prince Andrew. He just came in about half hour previous, so we knew he was in, but the footman wasn't answering his phone. There was no way of us contacting anyone up there, so we just politely said to the lady, "We're really sorry, we can't let you in at the moment because we can't confirm you're expected." So she said, "Oh, shall I ring him on my mobile?" So we said, "Yeah, fine." So she rang Prince Andrew on her mobile, and we could hear him clearly. He said, put an officer on the phone. So my colleague took the phone and he said, "Listen to me, you fat lardy ass. Let my guest in immediately, I'm going to come down there." Everyone heard it. The lady went red, apologised, and we just let her in. So after that, obviously, those sort of issues we had with him, we would just let women in. Didn't ask questions because we just did not want to.
Let that image sit in your mind. Because everything that followed, the headlines, the televised interview, the settlement, the public fallout, all of it circles back to that same mindset. A man convinced the world moved for him, and a household trained to never push back, no matter what. Paul Page served as an armed protection officer in the Royalty Protection Command from 1998 to 2004.
I mean, complaints were made about him. You know, he was a rude, obnoxious, horrible individual, but no one was going to take a complaint to the royal household because he's the Queen's favourite. On this particular occasion, we went into Prince Andrew's bedroom and his apartments, and on his bed was 72 teddy bears on his bed. The reason for that picture is that the maids have to put them back exactly like it's in that picture. He said if they don't, he shouts and screams.
That's 6 full years inside Buckingham Palace. He guarded the Queen, he guarded Prince Philip, he guarded Andrew. And out of every royal he encountered, he didn't hesitate when asked who was the most difficult. He didn't say challenging, he didn't say particular, he said Andrew was the worst, not just demanding, but verbally abusive. Explosive over tiny things.
She was very specific about that night. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time, because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at. It was almost impossible for me to sweat.
Surrounded by a system so polished and protective that nothing ever stuck, and no behavior ever seemed to carry consequences. Now, before anyone shrugs and says, he's just bitter, pause right there. Because what makes Paul Page hard to dismiss isn't attitude, it's the detail.
Why would you remember that moment of sweat?
Because he had a police officer picking up golf balls. I just couldn't believe that police officer was acting as a ball boy. So obviously that stuck in my mind. You know, it was a hot day, it was a hot summer's day. I was sweating, you know, and he was whacking golf balls. And if you're wiping your brow, what are you wiping off your face? As far as I'm concerned, he was sweating, and that's what I saw. At the moment, again, it's his word, and that's all he's got. But there are no witnesses to confirm that, so that is just what he is saying.
He described a bedroom with around 50 to 60 soft toys lined up carefully across the bed. Not tossed there, not casually arranged, positioned according to a laminated diagram. A printed chart showing exactly where each toy belonged.
I got myself into a lot of trouble when I was a Royal Protection Officer. I basically was dealing in shares. I became a millionaire while I was a Royal Protection Officer in my own right before I got in trouble. And I basically started investing police officers' money as well. And it came to a point where I was just hemorrhaging money. It started off well, we were making money, and I was dealing with millions of pounds, and the stress got to me, and I started losing money. So I turned to fraud. I went to court, I was held to account for my actions, and I spent 6 years in prison.
If a housekeeper shifted one during cleaning and didn't return it to the exact millimeter, Andrew would reportedly scream. Not sigh, not raise his voice slightly, scream! And think about that for a second. Nobody casually invents a laminated teddy bear placement chart. That's not a rumor you cook up out of thin air. That's the kind of oddly specific detail that only exists if you stood in that room and saw it with your own eyes.
back in 2009 wasn't really relevant to today's situation with Prince Andrew. Over the years, what I said has now become relevant, and so the press started using bits and pieces from what I'd said. So I thought, at the end of the day, it's what I said. I've got to stand by what I said because it's 100% true. So I'm on no revenge mission. I just feel that Prince Andrew has got a case to answer on all levels, including bullying. And I suffered at the hands of Prince Andrew, maids, other police officers and members of staff. But none of this has ever been looked into because people were too frightened. And also it's important for the public around the world to understand, just because you've got a title, and as I said previously, it does not mean that you are a good person.
Then came November 2019. Prince Andrew sat down with Emily Maitlis on BBC Newsnight and delivered one of the most talked about moments in modern broadcast history. He claimed he couldn't sweat due to a medical condition, saying it was connected to an adrenaline overdose during the Falklands War. That statement was presented as part of his response to serious accusations about being at a nightclub years earlier. His logic was simple. If he couldn't sweat, then the account describing him sweating couldn't be accurate.
Well, it took me 4 years of research, and I approached about 3,000 people, about 300 talked to me. And it took a lot of time to get a lot of these people to go on the record, but I think a lot of them were pretty appalled by the way that Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had operated, had got away with it, had been protected by the palace. And I suppose I then got these senior diplomats and naval officers to talk, which was great.
Paul Page watched that interview, and his reaction was instant. He said he personally saw Andrew sweat during his time at the palace. Not once, not twice. He said it was normal. Other staff, according to him, were stunned by the claim. He described it as absurd. That wasn't gossip. That was someone who had stood feet away for years. But here's the part that really lands heavy. It's not even about whether he sweated or not. That detail almost turned into a punchline in public conversation. What truly raises eyebrows is this. Andrew made that statement on national television in 2019.
You faced an unprecedented wall of resistance on the part of the Yorks in your pursuit of the truth, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I mean, I approached them originally to see if they would cooperate, not because it was not going to be authorised, but because I felt it was important that they should be allowed to help shape the narrative.
So you approached Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson?
Yes, and my publishers got letters, legal letters, warning them that they were being watched, what they put in the book. I was told that my social media would be monitored and that attempts were made basically to intimidate me.
Meanwhile, Paul Page had already been speaking about Andrew's behavior long before that moment. People inside the palace, according to him, knew that explanation didn't line up with reality. Yet no major institution stepped forward to amplify that contradiction. Not the broadcaster, not the palace press office, not anyone in an official capacity. Years passed before broader platforms gave him space. It took ITV. It took 60 Minutes Australia sending a crew across the world. It took independent outlets willing to listen to someone the establishment seemed comfortable sidelining. Because Page didn't come polished. He didn't come media trained. He came direct, and that made him inconvenient. And that's what makes this story linger. Not just the shouting, not just the laminated diagram, not even the interview moment that went viral. It's the pattern, the culture of silence, the insulation, the machinery that keeps everything smooth on the surface while tension builds underneath.
So I had a meeting with Sarah Ferguson. She decided not to cooperate. She decided, in fact, to tell all her friends not to talk to me.
When you zoom out, the stuffed toy incident doesn't feel random anymore. It feels like a warning sign everyone saw, but nobody dared to touch. In 2009, Paul Page was convicted in a £3 million property fraud case. He served time. That conviction has followed him ever since. The palace and certain tabloids point to it whenever his name comes up, using it as a shortcut to dismiss everything he says. But here's what's interesting. They've never directly denied the teddy bears. They've never clearly denied the screaming. They've never officially rebutted the sweating claim on the record. The focus always lands on the messenger, while the message itself just sits there, untouched. Yes, he's a former protection officer with a criminal record. That makes it easy for critics to wave him off. But what happens when similar claims don't come from someone easy to sideline?
I think the worry is that there are more damaging revelations to come, which there are. I have a lot of material which I'm putting into an updated paperback in the summer. I know that there are much more to come out, beginning to see them today. And I think we will now get more victims coming forward, and I think more people coming forward with stories. And I think this thing will begin to unfurl. It's going to be really bad.
What happens when the voice raising questions is a Cambridge-educated historian with best-selling books and a legal team behind him? That changes the temperature in the room fast. Andrew Loney wrote The Rise and Fall of the House of York. The book digs into Andrew, Fergie, their finances, their controversies, and their network of connections. It became a bestseller in the UK. Critics called it deeply researched, built on hundreds of interviews and serious document requests. This wasn't gossip thrown together overnight. It was structured, detailed, and heavily sourced. Then came the American edition. Loney sold the U.S. rights to Simon & Schuster under its Gallery Books imprint in a deal reportedly worth around $250,000. Early editorial feedback said the material was strong. It just needed shaping. That sounds normal, right? Standard publishing process. But weeks later, the contract was abruptly terminated. The manuscript was labeled unacceptable. He says he wasn't given the full 90-day revision period outlined in his agreement.
He just hoped he could silence everything, but of course you can't, because he is guilty on so many levels. And that is the great problem for the royal family. He is a permanent time bomb.
Now he's suing for several $100,000 in damages, arguing the cancellation damaged his shot at establishing himself in the American market. That's not a small setback. That's a door slamming shut at the last second. Look at the sequence carefully. The book succeeds in the UK. A major US publisher buys it. Editors reportedly say the foundation is solid. Then, shortly before publication, everything stops. No launch, no rollout, just silence. Loney has also said that archives repeatedly restricted his access to documents related to Andrew and Fergie, often citing security concerns or claiming materials weren't available. He claims potential sources were discouraged from speaking with him. He has suggested that at least one U.S. outlet backed away from running a critical piece after concerns were raised about losing royal access. There's no dramatic memo floating around that says, "Shut this down." Nothing that obvious. But when doors keep closing one after another, people naturally start connecting dots. Is there a signed order? No. But when archives limit access, sources go quiet, broadcasters hesitate, and a publisher withdraws weeks before printing, the pattern becomes the conversation. At some point, it's less about proving intent and more about asking who benefits when stories stall out. Then there's Tom Bower. He's not known for soft profiles. He's built a career writing books that powerful figures would rather not see on shelves. He's covered major public personalities, including the Beckhams and members of the royal circle. When he speaks, it usually makes waves. On Andrew, Bower has been blunt. He's described him as a professional con man. He called the BBC Newsnight interview a masterclass in deceit. He has publicly warned that upcoming memoirs and legal documents connected to past controversies could trigger what he described as a serious constitutional shakeup for the monarchy. Strong words, not subtle, not vague. But here's the twist, and the detail that caught fire online wasn't one of those explosive predictions. It wasn't the legal warnings. It wasn't even the publishing battle. It was something smaller, stranger, and way more personal. And once that detail hit the internet, people couldn't stop talking about it. It all came down to one sentence. During interviews and panel talks, Tom Bower dropped a line that sent the internet into overdrive. He said, and this is the direct quote, "This is the chapter the palace hoped I would never write." That single sentence took off across YouTube and commentary channels like wildfire. People started speculating about hidden material, about what was left out, about whether entire sections were too sensitive to see the light of day. Some claimed there was a fully written chapter that publishers were too nervous to print. Others suggested it had been softened or quietly shelved.
When he decided to do the interview with Newsnight, he clearly rehearsed how he was going to explain the photograph in the park and everything, and went into that interview with a clear determination to lie, not only clearly about his relationship with Virginia Giuffre and the rest of the things. And what is remarkable is looking at his face as he lies. It is the face of a professional con man, a professional liar.
Whether anything was formally removed or is still sitting in Bower's notes, nobody outside his office truly knows. But the impact was real. The message landed loud and clear. It hinted that there are parts of Andrew's story that powerful circles would rather keep out of reach. Bower was essentially signaling, "I found something." And that's where the connection starts to form. Paul Page, Andrew Loney, and Bower, three completely different figures. A former protection officer, a Cambridge-trained historian, an investigative biographer, no shared publisher, no shared career path, no obvious alliance. Yet all three describe a similar pattern. Each time someone edges closer to uncomfortable territory about Prince Andrew, resistance appears. A reputation gets hit. A book deal unravels. Archive access tightens. A broadcaster hesitates. You can brush off one person as unreliable. Doing it 3 times, that takes more effort. Then there's Paul Burrell. He spent years as Princess Diana's butler, living inside the palace structure. He watched how decisions were made behind closed doors. He saw how public storms were handled. He has spoken openly about what he describes as a culture focused first and foremost on protecting the institution itself. According to Burrell, the survival of the system often outweighed individual discomfort. He has talked about Princess Diana's own anxieties and distrust towards senior household figures. Now, Burrell was not Andrew's butler, and he wasn't stationed at Royal Lodge during key moments. His relevance here isn't about a specific event, it's about his description of the machine, how it functions, how it reacts when pressure builds. Think about that parallel. The same structure that Page claims shielded Andrew from internal complaints. The same environment Loney says limited access to research materials. The same atmosphere that allegedly caused hesitation in media circles.
This is the Duke of York. This is the royal family, willingly going onto TV and lying to the world about his relationship. And there was no compulsion for him to do it. We are really approaching, in my view, that along with Prince Harry and all the rest of it, a major constitutional crisis.
Years before Andrew's legal controversies dominated headlines, Burrell was already warning that the royal institution had a habit of sweeping issues under the rug until the rug simply couldn't hide them anymore. He didn't forecast a specific headline. He described a system wired to contain damage at all costs. Queen Elizabeth II publicly stood by Andrew for years. Even after the widely criticized appearance on BBC Newsnight, even after legal challenges and public scrutiny intensified, he remained within the royal orbit. Eventually, he stepped back from official duties. Titles were adjusted, public roles changed, but he continued living at Royal Lodge and maintained access to family spaces. Biographers and commentators have repeatedly noted that for decades he was considered especially close to the Queen. Critics argue that access around him tightened over time. Certain document requests faced hurdles. Institutional responses became more guarded. Supporters counter that the monarchy operates with caution by design. Either way, the theme keeps surfacing: control, containment, image management. And when you zoom out, the pattern is what keeps the conversation alive. It's not just one quote, one book, or one former staff member. It's the repetition. Different voices, different angles, same underlying tension. That's what makes the story stick. Not because of one explosive claim, but because of how consistently the pushback appears whenever the spotlight gets too close. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. Strip away the personalities, the interviews, the headlines, and what you're left with is something colder. Reputation management at the highest level. When pressure builds, institutions don't panic. They calculate, they assess risk, they protect the brand. And in this case, the brand isn't just a name, it's centuries of tradition, global influence, and carefully polished image. After the fallout from the BBC Newsnight interview, the public reaction was swift. The optics were rough. The explanations didn't land the way they were meant to. Suddenly, every prior criticism resurfaced with fresh intensity. It wasn't just about one statement anymore. It was about judgment, tone, and credibility. When a moment like that goes viral, it doesn't fade quietly. It echoes.
What's your take on everything with the Prince Andrew interview?
Well, do you know what? I didn't know him that well. Andrew wasn't in my satellite, and I've never really known him, and that's the honest truth. I feel sorry for the victims.
Prince Andrew stepped back from official duties soon after. Titles were returned, public appearances shrank, military affiliations were reassigned. On paper, it looked decisive, clean, contained. That's how large institutions move when they want to signal accountability without dragging the entire structure into the spotlight. They isolate the issue, they create distance, they stabilize the core. But here's where the tension stays alive. While official roles shifted, personal ties didn't vanish overnight. He remained at Royal Lodge. He remained within family spaces. That contrast and public removal versus private continuity is what kept people talking. Because optics matter. And when actions seem split between public message and private reality, questions naturally follow. Meanwhile, media coverage evolved. Early reporting focused on shock value. Later coverage turned analytical. Commentators started asking not just what happened, but how the system handled it. That shift is important. Once the spotlight moves from the individual to the institution, the conversation changes tone completely. It becomes less about personality and more about structure. Writers like Tom Bauer continued to hint that there were deeper layers still unexplored. Historians like Andrew Loney pushed for documentation and transparency. Former insiders like Paul Burrell kept emphasizing how tightly controlled the environment could be when pressure builds. Different angles, same theme. Controlled access, controlled narrative, controlled fallout. Now, let's be real for a second. Every major organization protects itself. Corporations do it, governments do it, sports leagues do it. The bigger the brand, the tighter the shield. That's not shocking. That's strategy. The real debate isn't about whether protection exists. It's about how transparent that protection is when serious questions hit the surface. Another factor rarely discussed is timing. Timing is everything. Public memory shifts quickly. Headlines cycle fast. Institutions understand that. If you can weather the first storm without total collapse, attention eventually moves elsewhere. New controversies replace old ones.
I spent 5 years trying to get access to this sort of information, and I think committees in the House of Commons should be looking at a proper investigation into Andrew's time as a trade envoy, because he was helped and abetted by a whole series of people. I would like a lot of the people who wouldn't talk to me for my book.
The intensity drops, the pressure redistributes. That's not luck, that's patience. But patience cuts both ways, because while headlines fade, digital records don't. Interviews stay online. Quotes circulate forever. Commentary channels replay moments again and again. The modern media landscape doesn't forget easily. Once something enters the public archive, it lives there. And that means any unanswered question can resurface with one viral clip. So where does that leave the story now? In a strange middle ground. Official consequences happened. Titles shifted. Public roles changed. Yet debates about transparency and accountability never fully disappeared. They simmer, quietly, waiting for new information, new commentary, or new documentation to bring them back into full focus. And here's the part that keeps analysts locked in. When multiple independent voices, a former officer, a historian, a biographer, a former insider, all describe friction when pushing against the system, it forces observers to look beyond personality conflicts. It becomes about culture, about hierarchy, about how power protects itself when challenged. No dramatic soundtrack needed, no wild speculation required. Just patterns. Patterns of access tightening, patterns of messaging shifting, patterns of consequences being carefully measured. That's what makes this story linger longer than most, because at the end of the day, headlines fade, but patterns stick. And when patterns repeat often enough, people start asking sharper questions. Not louder, not angrier, just sharper. There were reports that certain broadcasters felt pressure when it came to running tough coverage. Not always direct orders, more like quiet signals. Subtle reminders about access, about relationships, about future cooperation.
And I love Queen Elizabeth. I suspect that she was trying to protect who we know to be her favorite son.
I think that's why nothing really severe did happen to him when the Queen was still alive.
That's how influence often works at the highest levels. Not loud, not obvious, just understood. And while Queen Elizabeth II didn't build the entire system herself, she allowed it to operate around her son for years. That protection didn't disappear overnight. It stayed in place longer than many critics believed it should have. Then everything shifted, the Queen passed away, and with that loss, the atmosphere changed fast. The shield that had surrounded Andrew for decades felt thinner. King Charles III publicly emphasized that legal matters should follow their course. Prince William was widely reported to favor a firmer line behind the scenes, pushing to create permanent distance. The tone inside the institution wasn't sentimental, it was strategic. The message was clear: stability first, then came the legal escalation. Arrest, search warrants, devices seized from multiple properties, hard drives, laptops, phones, documents. For the first time, the full weight of investigative authority pressed forward without the same protective presence at the top. Lawsuits were active. Publishers were less hesitant. Commentators were louder. The environment had shifted from controlled narrative to formal scrutiny. Now let's slow down for a second. Was there some dramatic hidden vault containing a single explosive secret? Probably not. Real power doesn't usually operate like a spy movie. What existed instead was long-term knowledge, decades of observation, personal awareness. The Queen understood her son's temperament, the impatience, the entitlement critics often described, the associations that triggered uncomfortable questions. And again,
Now I think brother to brother, the King has had to say, no more, Andrew. You are not doing this to our family.
The choice leaned toward containment instead of confrontation. That wasn't one secret moment. It was a pattern of daily decisions. People close to the palace weren't blind. Staff saw behavior, authors researched patterns. Former insiders talked about structure. The differences between public image and private reality weren't invisible. They were managed. That's a key distinction. Institutions don't always deny. Sometimes they absorb, they cushion, they delay. And delay can last a very long time when loyalty runs deep. Fast forward to February 2026. Prince Andrew is arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Authorities seize digital devices and paperwork from Royal Lodge and Wood Farm. The National Crime Agency becomes involved. Legal analysts begin comparing the scale of the crisis to historic royal turning points, including the abdication crisis of 1936 involving King Edward VIII. That's not casual commentary, that's institutional level alarm. And somewhere in all of this are the voices that spoke years earlier. Paul Page, Andrew Loney, Tom Bauer, Paul Burrell. Different professions, different motives, different risks. Each tried, in their own way, to place pieces of Andrew's story into public view. Page was dismissed because of his past conviction. Loney faced publishing battles. Bauer was labeled dramatic. Burrell was brushed off as talkative. The reactions were predictable at the time. But here's what stands out now. None of them appeared shocked when legal developments intensified. Not celebratory, not smug, just unsurprised. Because the central theme they described wasn't complicated. It was about power and insulation. A man perceived by critics as believing the rules didn't fully apply to him, surrounded by an institution skilled at minimizing disruption. For years, that structure held firm. Then legal pressure pierced it. What investigators ultimately find in seized materials remains to be seen. That's a matter for due process and official review. But one fact is harder to ignore. For 2 decades, individuals close to Andrew's world attempted to raise concerns or publish research. And for 2 decades, institutional gravity seemed stronger than their warnings. They were called unreliable, sensational, bitter. Early critics are often labeled that way. Now the tone is different. The conversation is no longer about rumor versus loyalty. It's about documented investigations, formal procedures, and public accountability, whether outcomes confirm, complicate, or contradict earlier claims. One thing is undeniable. Voices that were once sidelined are now part of the permanent record. If you watch this and have thoughts, drop them in the comments below. If this breakdown made you see things differently, hit subscribe and stay locked in for more deep dives like this. Don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who needs to see it.